What's going on, Hindsighters? It's your favorite host, Rhasheeda Davis with the Indie Grind, and we are back with another segment. Today we have with us composer and drummer, Alfred Sergel IV. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. So happy to be here and have a conversation with you, Rhasheeda. Thanks for having me on the show.
No problem. So, Al, I wanted to know a little bit about your musical background. How exactly did you get started playing the drums? And from there, when did you decide that you wanted to go beyond just the drums and, actually compose music?
Well, I grew up with my dad being a band director and a music teacher, so I was around music a lot. Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine, they're like, what was your upbringing like? What kind of music did you listen to? And, like, my dad's record collection had jazz drummers like Art Blakey and Buddy Rich, and then he had, like, the Eagles and, Frank Sinatra, and then Vladimir Horowitz, which was a classical piano player, and then Luciano Pavarotti, and then like this random band called the Baja Marimba Band. It was this band that did pop songs, but it was all marimba, which is a mallet instrument. In certain moments, it sounded like really creative elevator music. So it was like all over the map. You got like this very heavy classical, really happening jazz, some of the best pop records, and then Frank Sinatra, like the ultimate jazz singer, among many. It was just crazy to be around, like, that was his vinyl collection, And then my mom was an English teacher, so I also was, like, kind of introduced to a lot of the great American literature and English literature writers. So I kind of was brought up around, I wouldn't say an artistic household, although there was a lot of art around, but it was definitely an educator's house where I was introduced to a lot of different things with a real open hand. Like, my parents never forced me. They made me study, and they always pushed me to do my best, but I was not forced to do music. I was not forced, other than just, hey, do your best and, go after the things that you're passionate about. I mean, I cannot complain. I had a really, really awesome upbringing, and that's where sort of the seeds of my creativity and kind of constant inspiration started. With the music side of things, particularly with my dad and my musical upbringing, I was always attracted to melody. As soon as I hear a really beautiful melody, and that could be in any genre of music, really, whether there's lyrics or no lyrics, I was always inspired, and I have a pretty active imagination, and it's visual. So a lot of times when I hear music, say if I'm listening to any kind of music you could imagine, I immediately start to kind of see things, Like, music gives me images and vice versa. So even when I'm writing music of my own, I usually have some type of story behind it because that's the way the inspiration comes. So when I was in high school, I pretty much going to go into journalism, believe it or not. I loved writing. I loved taking pictures. I was kind of part of the newspaper staff in high school and was thinking about that. And then a friend of mine, this crazy concept of technology came out called a compact disc. I don't know if you, the compact disc thing started to happen, and people were moving away from cassette. And this guy got me a CD of a record by Wynton Marsalis, who's a jazz trumpet player. Wynton Marsalis had a record called J-Mood, and it was the first CD I had, and it went along with my CD player. And I just gotten a new compact disc player, and it was like the first record. And it was the perfect timing because I listened to this record and I heard the songs, and just the vibe of the record was intriguing to me. Like, I'd never really heard anything like that. I had listened to some jazz along the way with my dad's collection, but Wynton Marsalis, the thing that he was doing, this was kind of like when I was graduating high school, junior, senior year of high school, I heard this record, J-Mood by Wynton Marsalis, and it kind of turned a corner because, CDs had the liner notes, right? And you could read about, like, who produced the record and who played drums and who played piano. And it was a jazz quartet, so it was trumpet, piano, bass, and drums. And so as I was reading these liner notes, which were written by a really, really incredible human being named Stanley Crouch, great writer, really steeped in jazz history, very, very good writer. He wrote these liner notes for the record, and I read them like a book, like a history book. And names like the drummer on the record was Jeff Watts. Jeff Watts, whose nickname is Tane, he's gone on to be like one of the most influential jazz drummers of our time. And this was like one of the first records he had played on, and loved his drumming style. So in the liner notes of this CD, I'm reading, and, Jeff Watts' influence are Art Blakey, Elvin Jones, Philly Joe Jones, Papa Joe Jones, Roy Haynes, and it's just a long list of all the jazz drummers that any jazz drummer that wants to, learn the language of jazz, which I consider, the greatest American art form. These are the drummers I needed to check out. So I'm 16, 17 years old, and I take my little notepad and I write down all these names. And this was back in the day before digital streaming or anything. And I grew up in a really small farming town in northwest Missouri, and the closest city was Kansas City. And it was about the same distance as we were talking before the interview. My drive to Kansas City was an hour and a half. So about the distance that, you and I are about an hour and a half from each other. It was about the same distance for me to drive to the nearest record store that would have anything like jazz that was worth listening to. So I literally wrote all these drummers' names down out of the CD liner notes and went and just bought the first record with their name on it. So it's Art Blakey, Elvin Jones. I figured out Elvin Jones was the drummer with John Coltrane. I figured out Philly Joe Jones was the drummer with Miles Davis. I figured out that Roy Haynes had played with Charlie Parker. And so I started doing this research. It's so incredible to talk about this at my age. It's technology is unbelievable. All we have to do is Google, who did Roy Haynes play drums for, and it would come up. Well, back in the day, everybody, they had these things called the library. So I went to the library, and I went and found some jazz history books, and I would go to the index, which is in the back of the book. The index was sort of the Google search engine of my generation. I'm 48, and it was I'd look at the index, look up Roy Haynes, and then find a few names, and it's Roy Haynes played with Charlie Parker. I'd write that down, and then I'd go to the record store, and I just started listening to these records. And at that point, I'm starting junior year of high school, and, that's when a lot of people that want to go to college, that's when you kind of need to start thinking about that. If you want to do scholarships or you want to apply to certain schools, it's good to start in your junior year of high school. And so that's what everybody told me. And I just was I was playing in the pep band, for basketball games, and playing in the jazz band, and I was playing in the marching band. So I was doing the regular percussion stuff, which the regular percussion stuff's you play mallets and you play snare drum. My dad being a band director, I was taking piano lessons when I was 6. And just like anybody else, I hated it. But I did it for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And looking back, that's the main instrument that I compose on. I'm sitting in my studio space right now, and I've got a keyboard and my studio gear right here in front of me and a microphone. So when I'm going to compose my songs, it usually starts with either a melody. If I get a melody idea, I'll usually record it on my iPhone, and then I go back through them on Sunday night and Monday morning, and I'll come back to my studio. Those will be my days to kind of I'm going to work on that song. And then sometimes I get the chord, and I'll work on the chords with the melody off my iPhone on my piano. So looking back, having piano as that first introductory instrument, my dad was you're not going to play drums in this band unless you take piano first, and we got to get you going. So, school band back when I was growing up started in 5th grade. To backtrack, I went through the entire, regular public school system. I went to a public school. I was in public school band. Fortunately, when I was 13 in 7th grade, I started taking private drum lessons with my dad because he was a college teacher. And I took private lessons from him and was in the school band. So my dad was really my first mentor. Just to give you a little backtrack, and I'll wrap it up. My junior year was when I was a lot of people are telling me I'm good at the drums and I could possibly get a scholarship for college. So I started really hunkering down, and I'll never forget, the girlfriend I had at the time, which, didn't pan out. It was in high school, So I just remember I was practicing so much. I would practice at the high school or practice at the college where my dad would allow me to, have access to the practice rooms. She just knew to bring me a Mountain Dew and a Payday candy bar because that was my go-to snack, caffeine and sugar. I just remember if I wasn't in school, I was practicing. I kind of got this in my mind and hey, I'm going to go to college and do this. I'm going to pursue music. And so I auditioned at a bunch of different schools. And as I said, I grew up in Missouri. And it just happened that I got a full scholarship to go to the music school. They have a school of music at Florida State University. It's a public school, but the School of Music's like a conservatory of music. It's a separate school of music that's part of Florida State. So I started there, moved down to Florida, and started pursuing percussion and playing drum and doing that, and had a full scholarship. But, you know, going back to that first record that I heard with the drummer Jeff Watt, the Wynton Marsalis record, some of those guys had attended Berklee, or at least spent some time at Berklee College, which is a college of music in Boston. And I don't know, I was like, you know, I really want to be in a big city, and Florida State's in Tallahassee, Florida. And I'll never forget when I was a freshman in college, I went down to this jam session, and literally some of the musicians that were at the jam session had played with Wynton Marsalis. So I'm like, wow, starstruck. I was like, oh my God. And I started realizing a lot of the musicians that played with Wynton Marsalis had come from sort of the South. They were from like the panhandle of Florida, where Tallahassee and Florida State is, or Jacksonville or Atlanta or New Orleans. And I got my butt kicked at this jam session. You know, they kind of let me know, like, hey, you're okay, but you need to work. If you really want to play, you've got a lot of work you got to do. And I don't know, something inspired me to talk to my parents, and I had a savings account since I was like a little kid. Like any money that my grandparents had given me, or, you know, any money that I'd gotten for a birthday, I'd put away in a savings account. And I used every bit of that savings to then pursue a dream of going to the Berklee College of Music in the early 90s. So I moved to Boston, didn't know anybody there, didn't know anybody in Florida, but I didn't know anybody in Boston either, and I moved there. And I finally formally, although a lot of my background was percussion, like I finally got to take some real formal drum set lessons and start to learn how to play drum set from an instructor. I was pretty much self-taught on the drums, because my dad didn't play drum set, he was more of a percussion guy. So when I got to Berklee, that's when it all started to really happen. Like I met all sorts of really great musicians. I got challenged, I got my butt kicked, and I connected with a lot of other musicians that were growing like I was, and we jam. And eventually I ran out of money, and but I was there for about a year, and I got a gig on a cruise line. And on that cruise line, there were some musicians that had been on tour with Harry Connick, and a lot of musicians that had gone to a lot of musicians that had also not just been on tour with Harry Connick, but they were in the 1 O'Clock Big Band. The 1 O'Clock Big Band is a famous big band based at the University of North Texas in Texas. It's one of the foremost jazz colleges in the United States. And so here I was. I'd gone to Florida State and gone to Berklee for a little bit. Immediately, I got this gig playing on a cruise ship with all these really great players. I was 20 at the time, and the next oldest person was 30. And so fortunately, these guys all took me under their wing, and were just like, the first 2 weeks, they're like, hey, go listen to these records. And they were like handing me stacks of albums and CDs to listen to learn jazz, you know? So at that point in my career, I was going into my junior year in college, and I was debating on whether to move to New York and just pursue music or go back to school. And it was literally like kind of the day I was needing to make that decision, because I knew I didn't want to stay on the ship forever. And long story short, on that cruise ship, I met my future wife, and she was living in Charlotte. And at the same time, I got a phone call from my percussion instructor at Florida State asking me if I'd be willing to come back, if they could give me more scholarships, seeing what I was doing. And so I moved back to Tallahassee and finished my undergraduate. And when I moved back, it was like such a crazy coincidence. Some of the musicians that had come to Florida State while I had been gone, one of them is Martin Bejarano, who's a jazz pianist who's played with Roy Haynes and tours constantly. He's very well known in the jazz community now internationally, and he's a dear friend of mine. And we actually haven't seen each other since college, and about 20 years ago, and we are actually doing a concert here in Charlotte in May at the Beckler Museum of Art, which is going to be cool to reunite with this guy after 20 years and make some trio music. I can't wait. But the long story short is I came back, and there was this pool of incredible jazz musicians. And between Berklee and the gig on the ship, I'd really started to hone my craft. So I ended up getting in some of the top ensembles from jazz at Florida State. And I finished my undergraduate there, and because we had so many really great players, they asked me to stay and do my master's degree. So I finished my graduate studies in jazz studies down at Florida State, which when you do that kind of degree, you're learning a lot about theory and composition. So a lot of my training started happening then in terms of like learning how to write songs, really studying jazz. And then because my wife was here in Charlotte, I just moved here to Charlotte, and I've used Charlotte as a home base for almost 23 years now, and I love it here. My second favorite city to Charlotte is New York City, of course. I try to go up there once or twice a year. If I'm not up there for work, I try to go there just on my own, sort of as a retreat to go see music and get inspired. But yeah, that's kind of a short wrap-up of how, my dad being a band director really inspired me, and then I just sort of started taking risks, auditioning for things. It's been really great. I feel like I'm just getting started. It kind of blows my mind that I've literally been in the music industry now for over 25 years making music. I feel really blessed. But at the same time, having put out a record last September that was kind of a step in a new direction for me with my compositions and how they were produced, I just feel like I've turned over a new leaf last fall. And with the album A Sleepless Journey, I've been writing since then, and I've got some new material that I'm going to be putting out later this spring, maybe early summer. And then we're making plans for a Christmas album. So although I've had a really awesome career, I feel like I'm, just getting ready to get going again and have even more fun, So hopefully that was a long monologue, but hopefully that gives you an idea of where I come from.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. As far as transitioning from band to an actual drum set, how was it? Because I also was in band. I'm also a drummer as well. And for me, when I started on the drum set, it was kind of intimidating, but at the same time, it was like, okay, you're taking your crash, you're taking your ride cymbal, you're taking pretty much like the quads, the toms, the kick, the bass drum, which is the bass drum, the snare. You're taking all of that and you're just combining it into one. So how was that for you when you were transitioning from the band class to an actual drum set, to getting those drum lessons? How was that?
That's a great question. Let me answer that in two parts. The first one is because I had studied snare drum and rhythm, and I could read notes, and my dad, obviously he was big on hey, you need to be able to play piano. So that introduced me to musical notes and rhythm. And then when I got into percussion, obviously when you're doing snare drum exercises and all that stuff, you need to read. So what ended up happening was going back, and I'd heard that first Wynton Marsalis record. I literally just was okay, if I'm going to learn this stuff, I'm just going to listen to his ride cymbal pattern, and I'm going to write out exactly what he played for 16 measures and practice that. And then I'm going to go back and do my best to fill in, either learning it by rote, by listening to it and kind of memorizing it on the spot. Okay, I've written out what he's playing on the ride cymbal, bang, dang, a dang, dang, a dang, dang, a dang, dang, a bang, dang, a dang, dang, right? The swing ride pattern, because this was mostly straight ahead jazz. And then I would go in and write what he did on the snare drum, or I'd transcribe literally what was happening on the drums and then really slowly go back and practice that. And that was the same with grooves. So the first time I heard Bill Withers use me, I was I've got to learn that groove. The first time I heard The Joker by Steve Miller Band, I'm I got to learn that groove, Right. The late 80s when In Your Eyes came out by Peter Gabriel, I got to learn that groove, In Your Eyes, from that 80s song. Right. So I would literally just write the things out and then go practice the grooves on the drums. And that was the way I meshed the classical training with sort of the drum set. Now, the second part to that is I marched drum and bugle corps. So I did snare drum with a drum corps one summer. So I got a lot of technique on the snare. It's interesting, when I went to Berkeley, my drum set instructor there was John Ramsey. And John had worked with Art Blakey, which was a big deal for me. And he'd also studied with a very famous jazz drum set instructor and phenomenal jazz drummer, Alan Dawson. So I was sort of learning this Alan Dawson method and philosophy from one of his students, which was my teacher, John Ramsey. And it's a very musical approach to learning the jazz language. But I remember when I came into my drum lesson that John was man, you play drums like somebody who marched drum corps. So it was very rigid, lots of chops. It was almost there, I kind of had a natural feel because I've listened to so much music, which I don't really think I could overemphasize, that whatever music you want to play, you really got to immerse yourself in that world. If you want to play hip hop, or if you want to play any variations of that, you really need to go check out all the drummers that are making that happen, all the live drummers, or the guys that are making the beats. You need to check out those producers. For me, I was I gravitated to straight ahead jazz. So I listened to all the guys I've listed before, Art Blakey, Elvin Jones, Roy Haynes, Jack DeJohnette, Tony Williams. I just went and bought every record I could with some of the most famous jazz drummers. Like there's at least 20 others I could list right now that I was checking out. But that was the one thing was like, number one, I transcribed, I used my classical training, or even if you don't know how to read rhythm, if you have a really good ear, listen to something, listen to the details of what they're playing and go try to copy it. Go practice that on the drums.
Right.
There's apps out there that'll slow things down. If you need to get an app to slow it down so you can hear exactly what they're playing, get an app, get the MP3, slow it down so you can hear what the drummer's doing, and then practice it slowly. So that'd be the first thing, is just literally transcribing, or what we would call copying, like copying or copping what that guy's playing. Like totally steal what he's doing, do exactly what he's doing, learn the language of drums in that genre of music by just listening. And then the second thing was literally having a drum set teacher go like, hey man, we really need to loosen you up. And then rather than digressing into all those details, that was a year's worth of studying drum lessons. Every week I was taking lessons with this guy and just working really hard on my swing feel and my groove and trying to learn how to be a drummer on the drum set rather than like I play marching band and then I play drum set a little bit. But I sound like a marching band guy on the drums, you know what I mean? I've continually worked to loosen up and, have a flow about what I do on the drums. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, for sure. So, Al, when you're composing music, when exactly do your ideas come to you, whether you're driving, like when do you get in that zone where you're like, okay, it's time for me to write something, you know what I mean? Because I know you said you start with a melody. Like what makes you figure out what drum pattern to play with the melody?
Well, the drum pattern, believe it or not, like I'm in pre-production for a new song right now, and this one started with sort of a riff. The story with this one is I had a dear friend of mine and kind of one of the legends here in Charlotte in the jazz community, a guy named John Alexander. He's passed away, but I remember we lost him to cancer. And I remember when we got the call, like when I moved to Charlotte in the late 90s and 96, like John was a tenor saxophone player and he was like the first band that I was gigging with a lot. I got the call to sub for a really great drummer, and then eventually it was like the original drummer of this band, who was John's band, didn't want to play anymore, so John did it. And I got the phone call that he had cancer, and I just remember really being kind of heavy. It was really kind of tough news to hear. So I sat at the piano and started just playing this piano idea, and I developed this song from a riff on the piano. So what I did there was I recorded the piano part on my iPhone, just a voice memo. And then I sort of just play it back to myself while I'm driving to gigs or driving to pick up my kids from school or running errands. And then I would literally like sing melodies back to myself on the iPhone based on what I was listening to and kind of work on it. The song's finished now. I've had a version of it for about 3 or 4 months, and producing a song, an instrumental song, I feel like there has to be a particular energy level to kind of keep people interested for 4 minutes, especially when there's not really a lyric. I'm a stickler. So I thought the song was finished, and then I had a friend of mine go like, I really feel like it needs something in the middle that's a little different to kind of offset the other really cool sections of this song. And so I wrote a bridge. Okay, so the song is totally done. If you're like, yeah, I'd love to hear it, I'd send it over to you right now, but there's no drums because literally I'm sitting in my studio right now and the drums are set up with all the microphones because I've literally been doing pre-production just trying to work through the various drum ideas I have. Because I've played on a lot of records, and one of the things I think has made that a possibility is the fact that I get lots of different ideas, and it's really just for the artist or the producer, it's really kind of picking which idea they'd like to run with. So what I've been doing is like demoing the song right now with different drum ideas, recording it, uploading it to like a Dropbox, and then listening to the different takes to find the exact drum idea that I'm like, okay, that's the juice. Like when you're listening to it and you're like, nah, that was a cool idea, but that's not the drum part. Like that's not the one that I want to live with this track forever. So in that way, my music's instrumental. There is an aspect, I always have some type of solo or improvisation, which Brother John's going to feature some really cool musicians. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag just yet, but that's my next single will be Brother John. and that's the one I'm working on right now. I've got a couple other things, and then we're working on some Christmas music. I'm still really deliberating. I feel like I'm almost there with the drum part. More often than not, the drum part takes me the longest. And to answer your question, go back, I get melodies all the time. I don't remember when it dawned on me. I think I was traveling with one of the artists that I travel with. He's a singer-songwriter, and he had ducked off into a corner of the Atlanta airport, and I saw him talking to his phone, and I went over to ask him if he wanted a cup of coffee and realized he's actually like singing a melody and some lyric ideas for a chorus into his phone. And I was like, oh man, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your phone. He goes, oh, no worries, man. I just had this chorus idea. It's been on me since my last flight, and I just wanted to like be able to duck away and sing it real quick into my iPhone. And I was like, that's a genius idea. Because if you think about when you're sitting at a stoplight, or you're washing the dishes, or you're folding your laundry, or whatever different kind of meaningless tasks that we do to facilitate our lives, right? All the little things we got, we do. Even ordering a Starbucks and waiting in line, you're just kind of like sitting idle. Ideas come. We're creative beings. I believe everybody has an element of creativity. It's just some of us go with it, and some of us just turn it off. I believe every human being has an element of creativity and is designed to be creative. Again, I want to say, like, some of us foster that and go for it, and other people, for whatever reason in their life, they turn it off or they just ignore it. I've just decided, like, hey, if I get that idea, whether it's good or bad, it's an idea. If I've got my iPhone, I'm going to catalog that idea. So a lot of times if I get a melody, I immediately sing it into my phone. If it's a bass line or like a melody, and it's never a complete idea. One of the singles that I have out that's done pretty well is called Why Closed, and it was based off, I went to the YMCA one day, and we'd had a power outage in Charlotte because we have a lot of trees, and when the trees hit the power lines, it doesn't take much for the power to go out. So I went up, and I'm like, why closed? There's a sign that says YMCA closed. I'm like, I've never seen that before. So I turn around, I'm going back in my car, and I start clapping this rhythm. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm like, oh, wait a second. I started just jamming in my head. I have no idea where it came from. I'm just like, why am I jamming right now? This is sweet. So I'm like, oh, my God, I got to record this. So I put my iPhone down in my car, and I just clap and sing as loud as I can. And that is literally the way the song starts, is me clapping and singing. It's the intro to the song. So I went back later and I wrote a bridge to it. I have several friends that compose for film and movies and, TV commercials, and they write all the time. I'm kind of like an instrumental singer-songwriter, if you will. Like, I get tons of ideas, and I have to, almost like a rock band or a pop artist, I've got to go back and really iron out those ideas. It takes me a little bit longer. Like what I said earlier, I really want to get the right drum part. I really want to craft the drum part. Like on my album, my latest release is an EP called Sleepless Journey, and the opening track is called Sleepless Journey, and the melody's kind of got this, it really feels like a sleepless journey. It's kind of like you've been on this journey and it's moving. The drum beat's like this, almost like jazz meets drum and bass, and it's just this constant chatter on the drums. I've got a brush in one hand, and I've got a kind of cross stick. So it's kind of got this like moving thing, and then the melody sort of soars over this chattering drum part. It literally took me about 8 months of various different drum beats. I went to my friend Stephen Price's studio, his studio's in his house, and we were just listening to the songs that I was considering for the record, and we happened to put on Sleepless Journey, and he had his drum set up, and Mike, he played it, and I played a couple ideas that were horrible, and then all of a sudden I got into basically what became the groove of that song. It's just in the moment I was inspired at his house and just talking with him, and I got out of my own studio and got to his space, and that became the drum part for Sleepless Journey, which is a very crafted part, And that's the kind of thing, like, I really want, if I'm going to spend time and write music, that's part of me that's a little bit more pop, rock and roll than jazz. Like, some songs play themselves, but some of the songs really need to have like a really crafted drum part that has a signature. Does that make sense? And maybe that's me being a drummer.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense.
Some songs are like, I just need to play time, and it needs to be bang, dang, and I just need to be swinging. Like my song Doss Ditch was off my first record. It's kind of a swinging tune. So that's pretty simple, that song. But the songs on Sleepless Journey, that was a lot of fun because I really wanted to craft drum sounds and drum parts a little bit more like a pop rock record. But yeah, the composition process, a melody can come to me at any time during the day, anytime. And rhythm, I've got countless drum ideas, like drum beat ideas that I'm singing drums into my phone. So I just realized that creativity happens just about any time, kind of when you're not expecting it. And I've learned to immediately document that as best I can on my iPhone. So thank goodness for iPhones or any kind of phone that has a voice memo function. I'm not endorsed by iPhone. I just have one, and it's an old one, but it still works, and I'm happy. But you have to kind of be aware of, you know how it goes. You're just walking down the street, and you're jamming to something. You know, if you've got a creative energy about you, or you're thinking about something, or your, you know, melody's coming or a beat comes. I mean, if you're like me, the turn signal comes on in the car, and you're just like, yeah, and I'm just thinking of a groove to the turn signal. You know, it's just a little bit off beat. It's never quite right on the beat. And it's like, that's pretty awesome. What can I do with that? That's the world of a creative person. It's like you're finding inspiration in different moments. It's just figuring out how to document it and also releasing yourself to not editing the thing right there. Just get the idea out. Don't worry about it. It's finished or not. That's not the point. But that, honestly, that took me a long time to arrive at that place of just letting it out and letting it be what it is and then going back to it later. And frankly, just as a note, I got to give the credit to Pharrell Williams. I read an article by Pharrell, an incredible producer, artist, and entrepreneur. He had that song, Happy, So Happy. But he's produced countless other hits. And I read an article about him in an entrepreneurial magazine. And he talked about the creative flow and tapping in and tapping out. It really taught me. It was like a, you know, one of those moments where you're like, that magazine looks interesting. Williams is cool. I think I'll read it. And then I read it, and it really reshapes the way I viewed creative output, you know? Like, man, I get ideas all the time. I just need to relax and just get whatever I've got out and not try to make it perfect. I just need to document the idea. So, enough said. If the ideas come in, if they come at all sorts of different times, and it's good because when you hit the dry times, you can go back to your voice memo. I'll go back to my voice memos and then listen to things and go like, yeah, this is worth checking out. I'll do thumbs up. I have different things to go back and rename them to know, like, I need to go back and work on this. I am so behind schedule. That's all I'm going to say. Too many ideas and I don't have time to work on it. So,
yeah, I can actually agree with you on that one because I don't know, sometimes I kind of get this block where I can't think of nothing. And I was just talking with someone last week about this. I'll be at my computer, and I don't know what to put in my DAW or anything. Like in my program, I'll be in front of the keyboard, and I still won't know sometimes. But as soon as I'm driving, or I'll be laying down getting ready for bed, and then I can think, I'm like, oh, let me put this in my voice recorder. I do the same thing. It's just so crazy. And that's when everything comes to you, when you're not in front of an instrument sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes for me. I'll be in front of every instrument in the world, and I can't think of anything. And then as soon as I'm not, it's like, okay, now I got an idea. Now I got to put it in my phone. And just like you, like I do the same thing, so I can definitely agree with you on that one.
Yeah, in a real broad sense, you know, I've often heard it said that there's two different leadership styles. There's a visionary leader and a managerial leader. And managerial leaders tend to be administrative. There's a perfectionism to that. And visionary leaders are typically a little more artistic. They think in big picture, and they're not necessarily administrative. And I'm both. So I'm literally like ideas for days, and some of them are bad and some of them are good. And then being able to execute the ideas and kind of, you know, administrate. That's why some artists need a producer. That's why some artists need management, because that artistic side of you is a visionary, and you need someone that can kind of get a strategy for you and help you execute that strategy. Executing a strategy, like, you're artistic and creative, and so, but at the same time, you've got to produce the show, right? You have to talk to me, and this is probably the fun part, right? Just having the conversation. And then it's like, oh, but I got to edit this thing. And, you know, then there comes the production part, which is administrative. And I think when you learn what type of personality you are, that frees you up to kind of like go like, oh, well, you know, if you're creative and artistic, then I think an iPhone is or anything, an Android, whatever, is going to be a useful tool, because you can just voice memo. If you had an idea for a company or an idea for a client, or whatever the work you do. And like, I voice memo tons of stuff. You know, I'm listening to the radio like anybody else, and man, it's like I get tons of arrangement ideas for cover songs. I could do like 2 albums worth of really cool covers, you know. All that to say, I'm glad to know there's another person out there that utilizes their iPhone for voice memo, because I wear it out. I really do. And again, like when I hit a dry spell, or when I feel like I haven't, you know, had any ideas, or maybe I've been so busy with other work that it's like I've just tuned it out. But let's face it, creativity is always coming to us. It's just sometimes, you know, we're just too busy to hear it, you know, and that happens to all of us. Everything comes in seasons, and I think the older you get, you relax with that, and like you're less judgmental against yourself about not doing something. And I think the voice memo thing's great, because like I typically on Sunday night after I get my kids to bed, I'll just go and put my AirPods in and just like, hey, let me check out some of these voice memos. And sometimes I'm just laughing out loud because they're horrible. And other times I'm like, oh man, that's a good idea. You know, I'll mark them and put a thumbs up and a date. I have a little system for like bookmarking. I'll bookmark the voice memos and know like, okay, so tomorrow maybe I'll work on this idea I had back in November of last year.
Yes.
I'm fortunate, you know, a couple years ago, I made an investment on getting a little shed that's close to my house. It's air conditioned and heated. So I have a little studio space, which is where I recorded White Clothes. It was all done in my shed. One of my friends, Chad Lawson, he's a Steinway artist. He's a pianist. He has a studio in his place, so he did the tracking there. And then one of my friends is a bass player up in Winston-Salem. He has a tracking studio. So we did that entire thing remotely, and it's done incredibly well for an independent instrumental track. I'm really happy for him, you know, how it's doing on digital media and everything. It was a big risk. It's like, man, should I do this studio space? I don't really have the money. I don't really do a loan. And then you take out a loan, you do it, and you're like 2 years later, you're like, this was a good idea, you know, because I'm sitting in it right now conversing with you. And I think that's also another thing is having, whether it's in your house or in your apartment, for people that are creative, you know, we're very tactile people. When it's time to do the work, it's really important to have a place where you know you're going to go and really get the work done. Creativity comes all the time, but when it comes to like taking that creative idea and then producing some type of content, that's the real work. And I can only suggest to people that it doesn't have to be a studio or a shed, doesn't require a business loan, but try to find that space where you know it just kind of tells yourself, hey, it's time to do the work. I'm going to sit here for this hour or two. I'm going to block this time and do the work. That's another lesson I learned from a friend of mine who puts out a lot of content and does very well for himself in the music industry. And he's just like, you put it on your schedule, have a place that you go, commit that time, turn your phone off, and just do the work. And that's another aspect of discipline that I've learned. And that's what I had to learn to put out the record last year. But that's probably another conversation. So that's just a little extra bonus for anybody who out there who's like, I have all these ideas, but I don't know how to get them out. It's like, schedule it and find a place where you can go do the work. I mean, it sounds really simple, but if you have other jobs to pay your bills and music, you know, I have other things that I do. I do consulting and different things to support making music. It's all within the music industry, but as anybody in the music business knows, there's a hustle and you just got to keep moving and you have to utilize all the gifts that you have to generate the revenue to support yourself. And so doing the work and getting it done requires discipline. And I wanted to mention this to you. I think you'll relate to this so much. One of my friends is a touring drummer and tours with a couple big groups, and he told me one time, I've never heard anybody say this before. He said, man, the music business is the most blue-collar work anybody could do. Because the amount of work and hustle it takes, I don't care whether you're at the top of the game and you're doing the Super Bowl or you're just hustling and trying to get a restaurant gig, you know, and you're a solo singer-songwriter. It's the most honest, hard work you can do. You know, it's like, It really is. It's never ending. But if you love it, you're going to be in it for the long haul. And I really do love it. And it's fun because the older I get, I'm more inspired to do more of it. And I've got a lot of really great stuff coming up this year.
So like you were saying before, you've been in the music game professionally about 26 years. And that's a pretty long time. So do you feel your music has changed since you first started? Like as far as the way you compose, the way you write, the process, like when you got drum lessons or when you first learned from your father and the way that you teach now, because you're also a teacher as well. So do you feel like anything has changed?
Yeah, I think as I have evolved as a human being, just getting older, making a bunch of mistakes and then, you know, just kind of adjusting. I would say the writing process, what's changing now for me, you know, all of us are inspired by other artists. I mean, I have drummers that are band leaders and composers, you know, that I'm inspired by. And I would say I'm absolutely a fan of their work and a fan of what they do. And I think sometimes, as of recently, most of those guys are coming from the jazz tradition. And when I started to write my music, I've realized that just where we started the conversation, I have quite an eclectic mix of inspiration. I mean, I'm hugely inspired by Phil Collins. I mean, I'm a kid of the 80s, so Phil Collins was a huge inspiration to me. Dave Grohl is a huge inspiration to me. Don Henley played drums and sang for the Eagles. Dave Grohl's a drummer, but he's also now the front man. All of those guys, I'm sure they have an appreciation for jazz, but their music is more pop rock. And then on this other side, I'm inspired by Mark Juliana and Nate Smith and Nate Woods and a lot of guys that are modern drummers that are around now that are doing their own music. And so what happens is my struggle now, it's a good struggle, is kind of like, well, who am I? Like when I'm listening to my music, what is the song really? Like that's what made my last record really special. My first album was the Alfred Sergel IV. I branded my last name because it was a jazz quartet, so I called it the Fortet. It was a 4-member band, and it was straight ahead. It was a straight ahead jazz record, and I had about 6 tunes ready, and we ended up really feeling good about 4 of them, so I put out a 4-song EP, and it was straight ahead jazz, and a lot of people love that record. I do too. It was really great players. But when I started to write more music, it started to gravitate to more vibe and more groove-oriented stuff that wasn't straight ahead jazz, but was still instrumental. It goes back to when we were talking about the drum groove. I think what's changed for me and what's developed over time is kind of being okay with being me and not trying so hard to be a jazz guy when maybe the song that I wrote is not a jazz song. You know, maybe it's an instrumental song and there's improvisation, and maybe it's still jazz. It's just like straight ahead jazz. And just trying to free yourself up to let the music be what it is and do the very best you can for the song. And again, I think for anybody who's out there doing creative work, we are our worst critics and our worst judges. And I think part of the process of writing songs a lot of times is letting go of my judgment of something and just letting the song be what it is. And if it needs to gravitate to more groove and stuff, I think when you're inspired by certain drummers, you know, part of you wants to be just like them and put out music just like them. And then you start writing and you're like, man, my music and my drumming sound nothing like this guy, so who am I? And you end up getting into a real journey of your identity. And it's like a friend of mine told me, the best drum lesson, if you ever come out of a drum lesson, you should have these 2 emotions. You should be completely frustrated and completely encouraged. And you came out frustrated because you're like, man, I really need to work on that. But then a good instructor is going to frustrate you and encourage you because you're going to come away going like, man, I need to work on that because I'm not good at that. But man, I'm good enough to go do this. You know, you're encouraged that you've got a gift, but the encouragement is that you've got a gift, so you definitely have the talent, and you have the talent to go to the next level. And that's where the frustration comes. And I think that's kind of what I'm doing with right now with my new music. I'm like exploring different rhythms and just really what does it mean to be Alfred Sergel IV? What does it mean for my music to stand alone and have its unique voice and me to be proud of it, you know, 10, 15 years down the road? At least at this point in the journey, you know, the majority of my career up to this point has been supporting artists, recording on their records or traveling and touring with them. And so when you step out and start to make your own music, you kind of have to grapple with these things a little bit. At least I do. And that ends up becoming a real cool part of the process. You know, you kind of have to forgive yourself sometimes. You know, that's probably what I'm learning now is like, hey, I want to make my music and it's going to be unique if it's really an authentic expression of who I am. And so depending on the song, that's where I'm at now. Like with Brother John, the new single I'm working on right now, it's like, man, everything's there. I've written, you know, it's got vocal parts because if you listen to my music, like the newer music, I sing along with the melody on the piano. So there's a vocal melody that I'm not singing words. And I wanted to do that because that's the way I write naturally. So this song is kind of very similar to the other songs I've done in terms of it's got that same timbre of me singing along with the piano or the main instrument. And I'm really adding a lot of new vocal layers, but I am really, really working hard to find the drum part that I feel like matches the vibe of the song. And that's a lot of fun. It's frustrating, right? It's encouraging because it's like, man, this is going to kill this song. But at the same time, it's like encouraging because I'm like, man, I'm really stoked about this song. I need to get to work. Man, I'm frustrated because I can't seem to break through to like I've got the drum part for this part of the song, but the other part, I don't know, So honestly, that is the type of thing that just makes me more excited about making music, is just kind of like the constant challenge of reaching the next part of my potential. Because I just contend it's a part of the journey. So it's a lot of fun. For any of you out there that are currently playing, you doing your own thing, I think when you start to produce your own music, you become even more of an asset for the groups. If you're playing in other bands, you become more of an asset in those bands because you produce your own music and you're so mindful of everything that's going on in the music. With certain things that I've got coming up, like last Christmas, I produced a record for Maria Howell and Noel Friedline. I produced a Christmas record. And that did really well. But, I'm drumming in that, but I'm also producing. So I'm bringing creative ideas and helping them, produce a record, making sure it gets out to the market. So, again, over the course of my career, I've acknowledged certain gifts that I have that are drumming, composition, and now producing, and kind of like a lot of the ideas that I've had, like, man, I bet you that song would sound good with strings. And then I mention it and we add strings, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, that's really cool. Like my idea for making that track better, or adding organ or B3, just the different ideas that we have in the different groups or settings that we're in, making that contribution or being willing to at least say something. The older I get, I'm just willing to put my ideas out there, and, if people don't like them, that's fine, But lately I've found that it's, having produced my own music and had a little bit of success with that, it's opening up some other opportunities to be involved in that type of thing in music. So it's really fun. I mean, the music business has its ups and downs, but I'm finding it more and more fun as I go along because there's different avenues to pursue to use the different gifts that I have, if that makes sense. So composition, production, all that stuff. The composition thing's been around. I've just started stepping into it. I'd say this would be like 2016 is when I was like, hey, I've got some good ideas. And then 2017 is when I started writing. 2018, I put out the quartet record. 2019, last year, I put out the Sleepless Journey EP. So it's moving forward with composition and producing my own music is relatively new. So yeah, I mean, 25 years of playing drums with other people and recording countless records with multiple different artists, and then traveling with a bunch of other ones to the point where I've been to 20 countries. And then it's like the learning curve for putting out your own music and producing your own album. It's like going into your freshman year of high school. You're like, I don't know anything, So I'm having a blast. I'm 48. I don't feel like that. And I'm really stoked. I really feel like I'm entering a really great season, and I want to take advantage of it, So I've got new music coming out this year, and I literally, before this radio interview, I had a meeting with a couple of guys that I work with for some video content and some different kind of creative ideas with video this year. So yeah, really cool. I mean, I guess what the short answer is, the older I get, I'm just evolving into different areas of the music business that are using different parts of my creativity, and I'm really enjoying it. And hopefully this inspires other people out there, because if you play guitar or you sing, trust me, you probably have more in you. Just give it some time. Just keep pressing forward, and just realize that you've been given a lot of other gifts. It's sort of like a flower that opens up. Once you just keep watering the soil, because you're good soil, and you're going to see other things prop up. I guarantee it.
Okay. Now, back to teaching your students.
Yeah.
What is that experience like? What is it like sharing information with students who are where you once were? Like as far as sight reading, composing, teaching drums or piano, anything.
I'm teaching at a couple different colleges. One, I teach online, and then I'm local here in Charlotte at a college here. And I'll tell you what's different about it now. Coming up, I was taught like real classically trained. So in the music business that I'm in now, it's interesting to go back into academics, like being at colleges, because I've always taught private lessons for a long time. But now it's like I've got two different colleges that I'm teaching at. And it's interesting in that formal setting to come back to like formal education, if you will, with a little bit of a rogue attitude. Does that make sense? Like, although I've got 2 college degrees, I've still got to show up and play drums just as good as someone who may have just graduated from high school and they're just really good at the drums and need to go to college. In the music business, none of that really matters when it comes down to delivering the goods. Which, when I mean deliver the goods, I mean you either play good or you don't. You either can write a good song or you don't. And now, information and education is shifting to where you can learn so much from an online course or just from YouTube. I think when I'm teaching now, I'm trying to utilize all the resources we have available with technology and to bring that into the education process, and also just trying to equip my students with a bit of reality to like what the music business looks like now. And the diversity that's necessary and available to create revenue to like do the music business. You know, there's like with Patreon and digital streaming, and then there's so many different avenues you can pursue to create revenue. I think that's the one thing. There's not I guess the term would be a one-trick pony. There really isn't like one thing. I try to bring that reality to my students. It was a way to inspire them. Because I think what happens when you're in school and you're inspired by particular musicians, unless you meet them, you don't really have a grid for reality. Does that make sense? Like, I thought when I was in school and I saw these famous drummers, I'm like, you just kind of put these guys in a pedestal. You're like, they have no issues with their family. They live a perfect life. All they do is play drums and travel. You know, you don't realize, like, they wrote a book and they've got a DVD and they do clinics and they teach at a college and their wife might work and they've got 3 kids and one of them has autism. You put them on a pedestal. And so I try to fuse a good bit of the realistic aspects of like how to really make it, because I'm an independent musician. I'm not on a label. I've worked with artists that are on labels. I think labels, if that works for your career and that works for your business model, that's a great way. You know, I haven't done that. If I got approached, I would definitely consider it. But it doesn't work for everybody. I feel like as an independent musician who's been doing music for 25 years, I think I've just continually tried to teach my students the world of adaptation. Because if you don't adapt in today's music industry, like pivot really quick, you can miss it. I have conversations with people still, and they're just like, dude, streaming is terrible. And I'm like, it's not going to go away. I kind of don't agree. I think streaming takes strategy. That's a simple way of saying it. It's like, man, streaming, I buy all my music, I don't stream. That's awesome. I'm not going to put my album up for streaming. I'm just going to sell it on my website for download. I mean, those are choices that people make. That's what happens in the music industry. I mean, streaming's been around for a long time now. It's not like a new fad. And that's just the kind of pivoting I'm talking about. So I bring that to my students constantly. And even with my applied lessons, like if you're taking a drum lesson from me, I do what I call producer simulation. And so what I do is I'll give my drum student an exercise, and it's a groove, you know, and I'll go like, okay, cool, I like what you're doing with that groove. Now I'm going to act like a producer, and I'm going to talk to you like a producer, and let's see what you come up with. Like, hey, we really love what you're doing. We need it to feel like it's more gutsy. Like we're not feeling the guts of the groove. We'd like to just get another pass of you playing this groove. We like what you're doing, just a little more gutsy. Because that's the kind of random stuff that producers will say sometimes. And so at that point in the lesson, the student is now introduced with sort of a reality of like, not everybody's going to go, hey, we'd like you to not play the hi-hat. We'd like you to bass the drums more from the bottom up, from kick drum, floor tom, and maybe we need to change the snare tone and dry it up. We just need something to be like a little bit more gutsy from the bottom. We don't need cymbals and trebly. We need like bottom, really hitting hard groove, gutsy. And so obviously as a teacher, in the back of my mind, because I've been in that scenario, I have defined what I would call gutsy, right? More often than not, when you're working with artists in a situation like a producer, producers are artists as well. They're being brought in to shape the sonic qualities of a record or even do some songwriting. There's a lot of different producers out there. But that's kind of one of the ways that I bring my experience level to the students. So if they want to pursue music full-time and be in the music industry and they get called for some recording sessions, then they're introduced to sort of some of the abstract things that can happen. You know, they can learn from my mistakes, because I've had plenty of producers say, I was playing on a Christian worship record one time, and the producer came over the intercom and said, hey, could you do a drum fill that's a little bit more corporate? And I kind of sat there for a second. I said, hey, can we take 5? I just need to come in there and talk with you. So I said, I got to be honest with you, I've never heard that term before. And what he meant by that was a fill that was simple enough that any drummer at a church where they have a corporate worship service, so like your volunteer drummer or a drummer, they really wanted me to do a simpler fill so that it could be mimicked by drummers when they were trying to learn the song. So I didn't take that as a negative. I took it as I've never had anybody ask me that nor use that term. But those are the types of things that, as an example of the abstract things that some producers will say, I try to bring that in with my drum students so that they have some sense of reality. And of course, the drum lessons have a ton of mechanics. But you did ask me, how do I bring in my music business and my industry knowledge into the lessons? That's at least one way. And then also just trying to get them to understand the real blessing of being in college and having a practice room. My goodness. When you're a student, hopefully most colleges, if there's a music program or whatever, there's some place where you can practice. Because when you get out of school and you're a drummer, that is always the struggle, because it's not like your instrument. I mean, you can have the practice pads and stuff like that. That's always great. But when you really want to get after it, you really need to be hitting the real drums. I mean, in a real practical way, I'm always kind of telling my students, take advantage of this time. Be behind a real drum set as much as you can, as long as you have access to a practice room where you're not frustrating your neighbors. Because give it 5-6 years, if you're trying to get into an apartment building, you're going to have a rough time.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk about your latest EP, Sleepless Journey.
Yeah.
I did my research, and you talked about finding your own voice within your music. And also, you were talking about being on a personal, sleepless journey that you were finally starting to wake up. So, first question, when did you realize that you could speak through your music? And for the second one, what things have changed since you started to wake up?
Well, Sleepless Journey, my first EP was quartet record. It was just digital, the Alfred Sergel IV. And like I said earlier, I had some of the best musicians in Charlotte playing with me, some of my dear friends, and it was a great record. And all along when I had the jazz quartet, I was demoing other songs. Almost all my songs have some type of story behind them. Like Why Closed, right? Why Closed is about the YMCA being closed. Some of them are funny, and some of them are deeply personal. When I got the Sleepless Journey, you're absolutely right. I've been working really hard, and I feel like I'm now waking up to, not necessarily, I'm working hard, but working smart as well. And also, I guess, kind of waking up to the idea that I have more to offer than just simply playing drums on other people's records. And that was part of the process of hey, I'm getting these creative ideas. Let me document these in my iPhone like my other friends do, and then maybe I can do like they do and actually put a record out. So Sleepless Journey, when I had the jazz quartet, which is where everything started, and we were doing shows in Charlotte, I was demoing other songs where the demo of the song was me playing piano and then singing along with the melody. And I just was not super comfortable with people knowing that I was writing this kind of stuff and singing, because it was kind of vulnerable. It was I felt like I was risking a lot. So I played one of my demos. So I did Why Closed with the jazz quartet, and we released it back in 2018. But before I even did that, Why Closed, the version that I put out that's done pretty well now, was released last June. It was the version, and I'm singing on it. I wasn't singing on the original. The thing is, I had already demoed, the original version of Why Closed was me singing and clapping. It had vocal layers. It had a completely different drum. It's a kind of a different drum groove, a way different vibe than what had happened with when I gave it to the musicians in the quartet, and they sort of went the direction that naturally happened with that band, which was super cool. But not really anything production-wise. It wasn't anything like what I did. So I was playing it for a friend of mine, Chad, who actually is the soloist. He played on my record, Chad Lawson. He's the pianist. I was hanging out with Chad and played him the demo. He's like, why didn't you put this out? I'm like, man, I don't know. It's I'm singing on it. I'm telling you, man, this sounds really unique. I think you should put this out and get everybody used to the idea that you create melody with your voice, and that brings a unique identity to your music. And so he just encouraged me to just put stuff out. And then the guy that I recorded Snickless Journey with, Stephen Price, is a dear friend of mine. And he, along with Chad, that's why I worked with them.